In 2005, I bought in. I bought into the idea of urban redevelopment, buying a home in a revitalizing community. I was excited about the change, the juxtaposition of the old and the new, the native and the pioneer. And lots of other people were buying in too. The mayor came to my house, set up his pedestal in front, and in a press conference praised the redevelopment of the Near East Side and how this would be a model for the rest of the country. He even brought me a gift, my very own garbage can. And I was a pioneer of sorts, the second person to move into the North of Broad development. And a lot of other changes were taking place. New sidewalks, new street lights. I even live on a street that is experimental. It's made of ground tire. This isn't just urban revitalization. This is environmentally conscious development. But life isn't about houses, and I had to get to the business of living. Dinner parties, family visits, cookouts, the best Halloween candy on the block. All of the things that you do to make a house a home. A few years later, I took on a gardener. He doesn't plant anything, but he does dig. Most of all, though, I worked. As an economist and historian, my research projects were about houses, or more specifically, households. At the time the gardener moved in, I was working on a method of measuring residential segregation. Now, the typical way to measure segregation is to take a city, an entire metro area, and divide it into smaller blocks and measure how white or black that block is relative to how white or black the entire city is. But nobody lives in those blocks. We live in households. We live in communities. We have neighbors. Everybody has a neighbor, even if they live miles away. So I took the census and I measured each and every single neighbor in the United States. Millions and millions of neighbors. And I was shocked by what I found. Over time, we have separated by race more and more. And not in some big way, in the smallest way, who we live next door to. The people, even if you don't know them well, you see pretty regularly. And this isn't something that happens just in the North or the South or just in urban areas or rural areas. And it's not just a late 20th century phenomenon. It's an American perennial. Between 1880 and 1940, the likelihood that a black person lived next to a white person declined by more than 35%. It's no coincidence then that during this time, there was a lot of racial strife. Segregation is dangerous. It's so dangerous that even getting from A to B can be fraught with the threat of physical harm or even the cruelest of humiliation. How do you know where to go? Well, beginning in 1936, African Americans developed a historical Yelp of sorts called Green Books. And these are listing places that you can patronize as you travel throughout the country. A place, for example, where you could get a haircut, a gas station that would let you use the restroom, a restaurant where you could be seated and served, places that respected your humanity. And by this point, I was all into maps. So I mapped all the Green Book locations, more than 30,000 of them in the nation, safe havens for people like me. It's ironic then that while green was being used to tell African Americans which places were safe for them, red was being used by the government and big business to tell us which places were not. In fact, at the same time that the Green Books were being developed, the government was marking neighborhoods in green, blue, yellow, and red for the purposes of residential security. Green was best. And in central Ohio today, those would be places like Upper Arlington and Bexley. Blue is not as good as green, but it's still desirable. That's the official designation. Places like Worthington or Grandview. Next came the yellow places. You guessed it, caution. Officially, those are neighborhoods that are in decline. The Short North or German Village. And last, we have the red places. These are places that were officially designated as hazardous. And that designation had teeth. It increased your insurance rates on your home and even prevented you from securing a home loan in those areas. So I had all of these maps. I had maps of segregation. I had maps of the places that were safe as people traveled about. And I had these maps of residential security. And I put all these maps together. And then I looked at the map of Columbus. And there it was, my home. Right in that giant red box, surrounded by all of those businesses, those red dots. I was living in marked territory. I may have been living in a place that was now revitalizing, but that's because the death certificate was issued before my parents were even born. But even more, those red dots told me these were not places destined for despondence. These were safe havens for people like me. Even more troubling, this isn't unique to Columbus. I can show you this map for every city in the United States, big or small. It's the same in Indianapolis. It's the same in Cleveland. It's the same in Detroit. It's the same in Philadelphia. Everywhere you look. So what happened to Columbus and those safe places? Those places in the green books where my grandparents could have stopped on a trip. They're gone. And the people, the neighbors that I counted, among the millions that I was counting, they're no longer there. People who live next to other people now live next to nothing. Now I understood that the new sidewalks and streetlights were there because they had been in such disrepair before. That the experimental street that I was so proud of was laid over decades of deferred maintenance. Even that garbage can took on a new meaning. You see, the city of Columbus decided that individual receptacles were now appropriate for the neighborhood, since people like me were moving in. I was forced to confront the decisions that were made about this community, which was now my home, down to my very house. In 1930, my home was owned by Elliot B. Henderson and his wife, Luella. Elliot was born in 1874 and died in 1942. 18 years later, on September 23, 1960, the house was sold for $1,290, about $11,000 today, to Jeanette Grider, a local dance instructor. She struggled over the next 30 years to keep that house afloat, but it was nearly impossible in a hazardous community. In 1995, it sold as a parcel for $700. The mayor didn't tell me about that. We discard that history, perhaps in the name of progress. For example, it took me a while to find out that I lived only 3 blocks away from the first and only Black bank in Columbus. The Adelphi Building Savings and Loan provided financial capital, personal banking, to people who were excluded from downtown financial institutions. It was heralded in the Crisis magazine as one of the best black banks in the nation. If you looked for it today, this is what you'd find. There's no memorial to tell you that it was there. So what do we remember? Well, the Lincoln Theater is a beautiful example of what the arts and restoration of a community can do. It has been restored to its original Egyptian theme. This is the theater where Sammy Davis Jr. first took the stage. Or the Long Street Cap. Every night that I come home, I am amazed by this beautiful public art installation, which memorializes the churches, the civic institutions, the celebrities, the entertainers, the athletes who called this heart of the African American community their home. So I started making maps and counting households, and I realized that that was not enough. There are people under there with lives, with dreams, dinner parties, gardeners. What do we owe them? I could walk in as a cavalier and say that there was nothing of value here, or I could own up to the fact that I'm on the receiving end of a very odd and ineffective form of reparations. Honoring a community and its history is not only honoring its stars and its glory. It's honoring the Elliots and Jeanettes and Luellas and what they did here on my street, literally where I live, and what they represented. And it's owning up to a disturbing fact. I didn't buy into urban revitalization. I bought someone's broken dream. Something someone was fighting to keep from external forces that had marked this community for destruction. When you think of it this way, you carry a sense of duty. And it's not about murals or public projects, but it's about decisions, large and small. I'm making the choice today to tell you about Elliot and Luella and Jeanette and what I know of their story. And reminding all of us that wherever we enter, if someone else has been, we have an obligation to ourselves and to others to tell them who and what came before. Thank you.